Joaquim, for the invitation. So there will be a slideshow that I will present, and luckily my flight was canceled, so I could be here with you guys. It has been great to hear the previous presentation. So let me track my time so I comply with the conditions. So let me try to bring some of the issues that we are working and that I think are really important. So first, FAO considers indigenous people as key allies for the Sustainable Development Goals. As you know, we are custodian of several of those development goals. And indigenous peoples are guardians of a large number of the remaining world's biodiversity, as we have been seeing in the last hours. So through their food systems and territorial management practice, indigenous peoples generate nutritious and highly diverse foods while they preserve ecosystems and often enhance biodiversity. And we have a lot to learn from indigenous people, in particular a transformation towards more sustainable food systems. We call it agri-food systems, not agri in the smaller dimension, but on the bigger one, on the contrary. For FAO, so that all of you understand, agri means forestry, crops, livestock, fishery, aquaculture. It's not just crops. And that's normally the confusion that we have. And indigenous people, like any farmer, will produce farm and food and non-food products. That's extremely important to take into consideration when we talk about the food system. And the Food System Summit organized in 2020 tried to bring this up. But there are 4 key indicators that I want to bring up, which I think are important. The first one is food insecurity. And according to the latest numbers of FAO, indigenous people represent approximately 5% of the world population, but account for 15% of the world's poor. And many indigenous communities face disproportionately high levels of food insecurity due to the factors such as land dispossession, limited access to markets, and environmental degradation. The second indicator is related to nutritional health. And indigenous populations often experience higher rates of malnutrition and diet-related illnesses compared to non-indigenous people. We have to look at them relatively speaking. And for instance, in some regions, rates of obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular diseases, what we call NCDs, are significantly higher among indigenous people. Of course, there are always exceptions. Maasai yesterday were telling us that that's not their case, but in other areas, it could be the case, and we need to look at that carefully. The other indicator, which is also linked to another SDG indicator, is land dispossession. So indigenous peoples have historically experienced land dispossession, and we have been seeing this today, which has disrupted traditional food systems and livelihoods. And according to the World Bank, indigenous people and local communities hold customary rights to approximately 65% of the world land area, yet only have legal recognition over 18% of it. And that's what I was asking yesterday, because it's not only the top land, but it's also the below. Why the below? Because many of the problems and why they are moved out of the territories is because of natural resources, oil, explorations, and so on. And the technology of today will allow to do that without moving them out of the territory. And that's something that needs to be explored and needs to be taken into consideration. Of course, it could be more costly, but I think it's really important to understand the positive side of the biodiversity and the environmental issues that they bring. And the last indicator is the loss of biodiversity. Indigenous agri-food systems are characterized by the reliance on biodiversity, yet many indigenous communities are witnessing the loss of traditional food sources. It was just mentioned by Joaquim before, due to habitat destruction, overexploitation, and climate change. And according to the International Union of Conservation of Nature, indigenous territories encourage around 80% of the world biodiversity, highlighting their crucial role in conservation efforts. So those are, for me, 4 key indicators that bring together the system approach, because interlinks not only with food security, with health issues, biodiversity, and land. Those interlinkages are very important, and that's how we have to approach food systems when we look at it and when we look at the trade. Now, one topic that is extremely important for us and extremely challenging is how we are going to see and how the evolution of today, of what we observe today in terms of food security, and how we can project this to the 2050 if we want to bring together the SDG 2 and the 1.5 degrees Celsius. Those are the 2 goals. SDG 2 is for 2030, and the 1.5 degrees Celsius is for 2050. Now here you will see the pathways that you will need to take to be able to complete. So the darker red is undernourishment people, the indicator that we track in SDG 2. And that's the pathway you need to take to be able to be there. And we are far from this today. We have 735 million people chronically undernourished as the midpoint. which will end, if we continue as we are, in 600 million people by 2030. But it's not only undernourishment, it's also the quality of the diets we eat, and that's the indicator of healthy diet. So the next color is the people that could not afford a healthy diet. And that's the pathway that they will need to change to be able to afford that. And the last one is indicative estimate of the total of people not consuming healthy diets today. So we need to reduce that to be able to achieve the 2050 indicator. Now, if we want to accomplish this, and that's the roadmap to SDG 2 and 1.5 that we are working at FAO, and we launched at the COP 28, we will need to achieve this type of changes. And here comes something that was raised just a few minutes ago, the importance of deforestation. Look at the top piece of the bar, the light blue. That is how the deforestation needs to shrink to be able to achieve this by 2050. And that's crucial. And that's where we need to understand that climate financing has to come to this transformation and, of course, has to come to indigenous people. That's the only way we can achieve this if we reduce deforestation at that rate. So I think this brings an idea. These are simulations. But this brings us an idea of what are the changes and the transformations that we need to do to be able to accomplish this. Now, how FAO is trying to bring this and how FAO is trying to create significant efforts together with indigenous people. So first, the indigenous food systems are often characterized by sustainable agricultural practices that promote soil health, water conservation, biodiversity conservation, integrating indigenous knowledge into modern agricultural practices, and has the potential to enhance sustainability and resilience in the face of climate change and environmental degradation. Indigenous food systems embody centuries of wisdom, as we have been discussing today, and there is enormous information that we have to link. And the way we are doing this is trying to bring this into our science and innovation strategy, which was approved in 2022. And this strategy fosters the work of the organization in strengthening knowledge, co-creation with indigenous peoples, including through cycles of actions and research. The strategy promotes exchanges of knowledge and expertise through hubs and platforms, such as the Global Hub for Indigenous People Food Systems, which is core in this element, and how we are trying to bring this into our science strategy. The strategy also supports FAO work with indigenous peoples on their knowledge systems, which started in 2014 with the creation of Indigenous Peoples Team. Now, the other topic that we are trying to do is to link also this to our climate change strategy. So indigenous peoples are essential agents of change to learn from solutions and innovation. And knowledge and innovation solutions have to be co-created, and that's why we are also bringing it into our climate change strategy, which is of course directly linked both the science and the climate change strategy to what we are doing in the roadmap to SDG 2 and the 1.5 degrees. Please note that the concept behind the SDG 2 and the 1.5 degrees is that what we do, what indigenous people do, what we do in the agri-food system is to provide the right to food. And normally we forget that. Normally we only look at the bad things that come from the agri-food system, the externalities, greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity loss, and so on and so forth. The point is that the two sectors that are affecting the system are energy and agri-food system. Energy will be resolved by the private sector. The agri-food systems won't, because we have a diversity of sizes of players. We have all the indigenous groups, we have all the smallholders, and significant complexity of elements. But the sector that really have a space to improve is the agri-food system. And that's why it's so important to bring the climate into the discussion. Today, only 3.4% of the climate financing comes to the agri-food system. And that doesn't make any sense. So we need to change that. And that's why we need to incorporate all these topics within our strategies and the way we operate in this sector. Now, linked to this, of course, is the hub. That has been the global hub on the indigenous people food system. So for us, it's one of our means of implementation to create this formal linkage. So in fact, the progressive increase in recognitions of indigenous people and knowledge systems was possible thanks to the work of the Global Hub on the Indigenous People Food System. The creation of the Global Hub is one of the main outcomes of the high-level expert seminar on indigenous food systems organized at FAO headquarters in 2018. The Global Hub was born from the need to identify and to bring indigenous people knowledge at the same time of respect and recognition of the scientific academic knowledge. We are building this convergence that we discussed at the Food System Summit Scientific Group and the Waipala paper, so to try to bring this scientific knowledge into our scientific strategy. Indigenous people knowledge is mainly oral and straight-through storytelling kits, folklore, songs, poems, dance, objects, and artifacts, and during ceremonies. And nobody has the right to change this mechanism that they have in place. On the contrary, we need to find ways in which we can bring their knowledge into the scientific system. It's a body that gathers observations by millions of people to ecosystems where they live, accumulated over hundreds of years, and the food systems of indigenous peoples are embedded within biocentrism, which is the recognition of sacredness and spirituality in all living things and their connections with the spiritual world. The indigenous people hold unique understanding of the functioning of their local ecosystems that they manage with core values, stewardship, respect, reciprocity, core towards Mother Earth. The overarching objectives of the Global Hub will concentrate on 4 activities pertaining to the indigenous people food systems, or agri-food systems as we call it, and their sustainability and climate resilience. The first one is a knowledge beer platform. So we need to have a space for sharing ideas and knowledge. The second one is a knowledge platform designed as a knowledge repository, and it will be an online staple source of information. The third one is advice on policy dialogues, providing reliable inputs to ongoing policy discussions. And that's why we went through all our mechanisms. And the COAC was the one who approved the establishment of the hub. And that allowed us to formalize this information into our activities and our strategies. And the last one, the fourth, is the creation of synergies to drive the design of multidisciplinary and collaborative research to fill the gap of knowledge and understanding of indigenous people food systems and to prioritize studies to be carried out. These 4 activities together form a coherent global program with the intention to continue learning from indigenous people food systems, prolonging data gathering, which is central. It's a huge gap today, availability of data that will allow us to make better analysis and better understanding. But I was surprised in the previous presentation how significant data is also there, but we need to gather it together and to put it in a common system so it becomes a real public good to the society. Lastly, the institutional support to self-certification or mechanisms that are in place to be able to make this a reality, and this, of course, is tied to property rights that needs to be part of this system. The Global Hub aims to bridge the gap and the knowledge between indigenous people knowledge and scientific knowledge, and here is how it was coordinating the draft of the White Waipala paper that it was mentioned, I mentioned before, and also was mentioned by John yesterday in the morning. And the White Waipala paper, which I thought was a huge contribution to the scientific group, it complies 60 contributions from 6 or 7 sociocultural regions, and it's something that has been published, and it's something that we need to keep working and keep updating and keep expanding. And during the UN Food System Summit, the scientific group emphasized, led by Joachim von Braun, the need of combine traditional knowledge with indigenous people knowledge in order to move forward. This was really a key step forward, and thank you, Joachim, for that. The work of the Global Hub was also highlighted by the UN Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, for its way to incorporate indigenous people knowledge in evidence-making. So that was central in the process and something that we need to keep working. In that sense, the White Waipala paper catalyzed the creation of a coalition, which is the other means of implementation, the Coalition on Indigenous People Food Systems under the lead of indigenous leaders and with the support of 7 FAO members and FAO. John explained yesterday how the coalition is growing. Now I think it has up to 13 members, but it needs to keep growing, and we need to keep incorporating all the areas where indigenous peoples are. And the coalition was officially launched in the Basu Food Lab during the World Food Forum in 2022, and the indigenous group has been coming consistently to all our World Food Forums every year on October of this year, and I hope this year will be the same, and we will have you with us. The coalition is a unique policy implementation mechanism that enables indigenous peoples to work with governments, UN agencies, and other organizations to strengthen and promote indigenous peoples' food and knowledge systems at all levels. In particular, the coalition will work on scaling up indigenous people food systems by strengthening intercultural co-creation processes, scientific and empirical research, which is so important in the work we are doing. There was also a significant impact of the coalitions in biocentric restoration. Indigenous people biocentric restoration is an indigenous-led alternative to most common restoration techniques practiced by universities, NGO, forest services around the world. Indigenous people biocentric restoration put indigenous people cosmogony at the center of the work, allowing the community through their knowledge systems to restore the lost memory of the territory. I will finish in a minute, Joe. Finally, the CFS. And indigenous people finally were able to incorporate their activities within the CFS activities. And now we have a dedicated work stream and an HLP report that will be in the next MIPO plan from 2024 to 2025. This is essential and is another way in which we have another mechanisms of implementation. So in summary, changes in the agri-food system has far-reaching implications for all and especially for indigenous livelihoods, affecting cultural continuity, food security and nutrition, health, socioeconomic status, and environmental sustainability. Addressing these challenges requires recognizing, learning from, and respecting the rights and knowledge of indigenous people, promoting inclusive and participatory approaches to food governance, and supporting initiatives that strengthen indigenous agri-food systems and enhance their resilience in the face of ongoing changes and challenges. Thank you so much.